What if the people we need most arrive just as we begin to lose hope? This is the story of a little girl who didn't stop praying, and the man who unknowingly walked straight into her prayer. The house was quiet in the way only tired homes become, where even the hum of the fridge sounds like a sigh. In the small, dimly lit kitchen, the kettle whistled softly, steam curling upward like a whisper too shy to be heard. Lila sat at the table with her face resting on her palm, her eyes staring into a chipped, half-empty mug of tea that had long gone cold. Her phone buzzed once, then again, and then went silent. She didn't need to check it, her boss reminding her about the early shift tomorrow at the grocery store. She exhaled deeply and nudged the mug away with tired fingers. In the living room just beyond, 7-year-old Maya sat cross-legged on the worn carpet, her knees pressed to her chest as she bent over a coloring book that had seen better days. Most of the pages had already been filled with her bold, clumsy colors. Today's drawing was different. It wasn't a princess or a castle. It was a picture of her family. With a steady hand, she had drawn a smiling girl in pigtails, herself, and next to her, a woman with long hair and gentle eyes, her mom. But next to them was a space, always a space. For days, she'd left it blank. For weeks, really. But now, with a quiet breath, she chose a brown crayon and began to fill it in. Short hair, kind smile, gentle eyes. Just enough to look friendly. Just enough to look like he belonged. Her small voice carried across the room. Mom. Lila looked up, pulled from her thoughts. Yeah, baby. Maya didn't look up. Her crayon kept moving, slower now. Do you think maybe God forgot about us? Lila paused, dish towel in hand, halfway between standing and sitting.
What? No.
Why would you say that? Maya finally glanced up, her eyes wide and too wise for her age. Because I've been praying every night, and nothing's changed. Lila walked slowly to the living room and sat beside her daughter. The coloring book lay open between them like a confession. Lila looked at the newly drawn figure, then back at Maya. What are you praying for? She asked gently. Maya leaned her head against her mom's shoulder. For you, she whispered. For someone to help you smile. Like a friend. Or maybe a dad. One who stays. Lila's heart squeezed. Her throat tightened and she blinked quickly, trying to stop the tears before they could form. She'd promised herself she wouldn't cry in front of Maya anymore. Oh, sweetheart, she said softly. Maya's little fingers reached up and took hers. I just think you should smile more. Like when Grandma was alive. You used to smile then. Lila wrapped her arms around her daughter and held her tightly. She rested her cheek against Maya's hair and let the moment hold her, even if her heart was trembling. I'm okay, baby, she whispered into her daughter's hair. I promise. Maya pulled back just enough to look her mother in the eyes. But you cry at night. The words hung in the air, heavy and impossible to deny. Lila looked away. Sometimes being strong still feels like being sad, she admitted. But I'm trying.
For you.
Maya nodded solemnly, then got up and walked to the window. The sky outside was dimming, the street bathed in the golden glow of the early evening. Across the street, the house next door sat empty, its windows dark and hollow. A for sale sign tilted in the lawn, as if the wind had grown tired of straightening it. I wish someone would move in, Maya said softly. Lila chuckled, trying to lighten the mood. Careful what you wish for. Might be a rock band with loud drums. Maya turned with a cheeky grin. I'd even take a grumpy old man. As long as he doesn't leave. They laughed then, quietly, and a little sadly. It was the kind of laughter that sounded like hope trying to breathe. That night, after brushing her teeth and slipping into her unicorn pajamas, Maya knelt beside her bed like she always did. Her prayer voice was small but clear. Igot. It's me again, Maya. She glanced toward the door, making sure her mom wasn't listening. I know you're busy. Wars, planets, other kids. I get it. But if you have time, maybe send mommy someone? Not just for me. For her. She works really hard. I think she misses being loved. I know I don't really understand how dads work, but I think we need one. A good one. If you could just send someone who stays, I'll be good forever. I promise. She climbed into bed, clutching her stuffed giraffe to her chest as rain began to fall, soft and steady like the world was singing her to sleep. In the room next door, Lila lay wide-eyed in the dark, her mind racing with quiet fears and lonely memories. Her world had become a cycle of working, surviving, and keeping her smile stitched tightly in place for Maya's sake. But even now, alone with the shadows, she wondered, was surviving the same as living? Across town, as the rain began to gently tap the rooftop shingles, a black pickup truck rolled to a slow stop in front of the house next door. The engine cut. The headlights dimmed. Inside sat a man with tired eyes and a flannel shirt, gripping the steering wheel like it was the only thing tethering him to this life. His name was Jonah Cole, and though he didn't know it yet, he had just driven into someone's unanswered prayer. He looked up at the house he had bought sight unseen. Small.
Worn.
Quiet. Just what he needed. He leaned back in his seat and sighed. And across the street, inside a small bedroom where a child slept curled around a stuffed giraffe, the first thread of connection had already begun to form, unseen, delicate, but unshakable. A prayer had been spoken, and a quiet answer had arrived. The morning sun crept gently across the cracked window panes, dust dancing in its beams like golden fireflies. It was Sunday, the kind of Sunday that smelled like wet soil and second chances. Somewhere beyond the trees, a bird sang a sharp, bright tune as if announcing the beginning of something unspoken. Maya was already on the couch, knees planted into the cushions, hands cupped around her eyes as she pressed her face against the living room window. "He's unloading boxes," she whispered like she had discovered a secret treasure. Lila, still in her robe, stirred her coffee with more force than necessary.
Who is?
"The man in the truck," Maya answered. "The one from last night.
He's big.
Wearing a flannel shirt. Definitely not a rock star." Lila stepped closer and peeked through the curtain. Sure enough, there he was, tall, maybe in his late 30s, with worn jeans and boots caked in mud. He moved like someone who had spent too long doing things alone, steady, careful, and with a quiet weight in his shoulders. From the back of his pickup, he lifted a box marked "Fragile" and cradled it with the same care one might give a sleeping child. "Maybe he's just passing through," Lila murmured, more to herself than to Maya. "Nope," Maya replied confidently. "He's unpacking a toaster." Lila blinked. "And nobody unpacks a toaster if they're just visiting." Maya's eyes never left the window. "It means he's staying. Definitely." Lila chuckled under her breath and took a sip of her coffee. "You and your toaster logic." But Maya turned toward her with a sudden spark in her eyes. "Can we make something? Muffins or cookies? You know, welcome him." Lila hesitated. "Sweetheart, we don't know him. He might not want company. But what if he does?" Maya said, her voice growing more animated. "What if he's lonely? What if he doesn't even know he needs muffins?" It was an innocent idea, wrapped in the purest kind of empathy, the kind only a child could offer. And Lila felt something stir in her chest, something she hadn't felt in a long time. Curiosity, nervousness, the thin thread of hope. Maya had already begun rummaging through the kitchen drawers, her little hands grabbing the muffin tin, the measuring cups, the brown-spotted bananas no one had eaten. Half an hour later, the apartment smelled of banana chocolate chip muffins, sweet, warm, and inviting. Maya beamed as she carefully arranged them in a box. On the top, she placed a sticky note in bright pink marker. "Welcome," from Maya and Lila. Underneath it, a drawing, a sun, and two stick figures waving from a house. Lila stared at the box, suddenly unsure. "Okay," she said, "we're just dropping them off and heading right back. Deal?" Maya held up two fingers. "Scouts honor." "You're not in Scouts." "I've seen cartoons. It still counts." The spring grass was still damp beneath their shoes as they made their way across the patchy lawn. Lila held the box carefully, Maya skipping beside her, practically vibrating with excitement. Jonah was in the garage, sorting through a collection of old tools when he noticed them approaching. His expression tensed at first, habit, not hostility. Just the guardedness of someone used to solitude. But then he saw Maya, her small arms cradling the box like it held something sacred, and his features softened. "Hi," she called out, not an ounce of shyness in her tone. "I'm Maya. This is my mom, Lila. We live over there. You're new." Jonah set the wrench in his hand down and stood. "I gathered that much." Maya thrust the box forward. "We made muffins. They're banana and chocolate chip. Not too many chips, though, because Mommy says chocolate can be loud." Jonah chuckled, a low sound that had almost forgotten how to rise. "Well, I'll take my chances." He accepted the box gently, like it was made of glass. "That's very kind of you." Lila stood a step behind, slightly uncomfortable but smiling politely. "She insisted," she said with a small shrug. Jonah looked at her then. Really looked. Not with judgment. Not like the men from her past who had stared with assumptions or expectations. His gaze was soft, steady. Not prying, but present. "I appreciate it," he said sincerely. "I'm Jonah." They stood in silence for a moment too long. The kind of silence that stretches when two people aren't quite sure what to say, but also don't want to walk away. Maya filled the gap with a question as simple as it was piercing. "Do you have kids?" Lila's eyes widened. "Maya." But Jonah didn't flinch. His gaze dropped slightly, and his voice grew quiet. "I did," he said. "A son. He passed away a few years ago." The air changed immediately. The brightness faded a little. Not into darkness. Just something solemn. Real. "I'm so sorry," Lila said softly. Jonah nodded once. He was 6. Had his mom's laugh. After a moment he added, "Didn't mean to make this heavy." "You didn't," Lila replied. "We know what it's like to miss someone, too." "Your husband?" Jonah asked gently. Maya answered before Lila could. "He left when I was 2. I don't remember him." Jonah looked at her, then at Lila. "That's tough." Maya shrugged, her voice light. "It's okay. Mommy says some people leave because they don't know how to stay." The words hit Jonah like a quiet wave, the kind that doesn't knock you over, but changes the shape of the shore. He gave a small smile. "Thank you both again. These look amazing." Maya beamed. "If you ever need a hammer, we have one. It's pink but strong." Jonah laughed, a sound he hadn't made in months. "I'll keep that in mind." They turned to leave, and Lila hesitated, glancing back. "If you ever need anything," she said, "we're just next door." "I'll remember that," he replied. As they walked home, Lila's chest ached, not from pain, but from a door creaking open that had stayed shut far too long. Something unfamiliar was happening, and it scared her. That evening, as the last rays of sunlight stretched across the porch, she sat with a cup of tea. Across the way, Jonah's porch light blinked on. A small gesture, but it made her feel seen. And inside Jonah's house, the muffin box sat on the counter, untouched. A photo of a young boy peeked from a leather wallet nearby. Jonah sat quietly, staring at the sticky note. The days that followed were quiet, stitched together by the gentle rhythms of spring, chirping birds, blooming dandelions, and the occasional bark of a neighborhood dog. The trees had started to wear green again, and sunlight draped itself lazily across the front yards like a favorite old blanket. Jonah worked mostly in silence. Each day, he found something to fix in his new home: the sagging porch railing, the cracked kitchen tiles, a loose doorknob in the hallway. He moved methodically, as if each repair was a small way to earn his place in the world again. It was easier to focus on broken wood and bent nails than the ache he still carried deep inside, the one with a name and a laugh that once belonged to his son. Across the yard, Maya watched him like it was her part-time job. Sometimes she bounced a ball near the curb. Other times she sprawled across the grass with a notebook, drawing fantastical creatures with crooked wings and giant eyes. But mostly, she just sat on the edge of her lawn, her elbows resting on her knees, and her gaze following every hammer strike and ladder shift like it was the most fascinating thing she'd ever seen. Jonah noticed her. At first, he tried to ignore it. Children made him nervous now, not because he didn't like them, but because they reminded him of what had been taken from him. But there was something different about this girl. She didn't ask questions with words, but with her presence. She didn't demand attention, but somehow made it impossible not to offer it. One evening, as he knelt in the driveway struggling to remove a flat tire from his truck, she appeared beside him like a whisper. "You look like you're wrestling a hippo," she observed seriously. Jonah flinched slightly, not expecting the voice. He glanced over, wiping sweat from his forehead with the back of his hand. "More like a very stubborn turtle," he replied. Maya tilted her head, considering. "Do you need help? I have strong fingers." He chuckled under his breath. "I think I've got it covered. But thanks." She plopped down onto the curb beside him, legs crossed like she belonged there. "You always fix stuff by yourself?" Jonah returned his focus to the tire. "Mostly." "Why?" He paused. "Because I'm used to it." She nodded, as if that made perfect sense. "I'm used to being the one who talks too much." Jonah smiled at that. "You're very self-aware for someone your age." "I read books," she said proudly. "And I talk to people, even the ones who don't talk back. Like our cat." He tried not to laugh. "Sounds like you've got life figured out." Maya looked at him for a moment, head slightly tilted. "You don't talk much." Jonah shrugged. "Neither do turtles." Maya laughed, really laughed, and it caught him off guard. Not because it was loud or jarring, but because it sounded exactly like childhood should. Unfiltered, bright, and alive. "You're not scary," she said suddenly. Jonah blinked. "Well, thanks." "You're sad," she continued. "That's different." For a moment he said nothing. The wrench slipped in his hand, and he had to adjust his grip. He didn't know what to say to a child who saw through him like that. It made him uncomfortable, but not in a bad way, more like someone rearranging a room and finding something long forgotten under the couch. "You're very observant," he finally said. Maya shrugged again. "It helps." She kicked at a stone near her shoe. "Do you like chocolate milk?" Jonah looked confused. Sure. I'll be right back." And before he could object, she was gone, darting across the yard and into her house. Jonah blinked. That girl was like weather, sudden and impossible to ignore. 5 minutes later, she reappeared, carefully carrying a plastic cup of chocolate milk and 2 Oreos on a napkin decorated with crayon hearts. "For energy," she said, handing it to him like it was a priceless artifact. "Thanks," he replied, genuinely surprised. "You always feed your neighbors?" "Only the nice ones." As he sipped, Lila stepped onto the porch, drying her hands with a towel. Her eyes scanned the scene and landed on her daughter, then on Jonah. "Maya," she called, "don't bother Mr. Jonah." "She's not bothering me," Jonah said quickly. "We're just having snacks." Lila walked over slowly, clearly debating if she should apologize. Her eyes, as usual, carried a quiet tiredness, like someone who hadn't truly rested in years, even when her body was still. "She talks about you a lot," she said. "Hope that's not weird." "Not at all," Jonah replied, handing the cup back. "She's unique. She's also supposed to be doing her homework." "Fractions are evil," Maya muttered dramatically. Jonah smirked. "She's not wrong." Lila smiled slightly, and for the first time, it wasn't the forced kind. It was faint, but real. "You doing okay here?" she asked. "The neighborhood's quiet, but the plumbing might drive you insane." "I like quiet," he said. "And the pipes remind me I'm not living in a hotel anymore." Lila nodded. "If you ever need anything, tools, food, company, just knock." There was a brief silence. A beat of possibility. "I'll keep that in mind," Jonah said. That night, Jonah sat on his porch long after the sun had set. The chocolate milk was gone, but the memory of her laughter wasn't. He thought about the crayon hearts, the pink napkin, the child who wasn't afraid of sadness, and her mother, soft-spoken, strong in a way only single mothers truly understood. He hadn't planned on company. But sometimes company finds you anyway. Tuesday arrived like most others in Lila's world, full of noise in her head and silence in her heart. She stood at the kitchen sink, sleeves rolled up, hands scrubbing dishes with more force than necessary. The radio hummed a soft tune in the background, but it barely registered in her thoughts. A stack of unpaid bills rested on the counter like they were mocking her. And Maya's school had just sent home a permission slip for a $40 field trip, a science museum she couldn't afford this month. She closed her eyes and pressed her hands to the counter.
Breathe.
Just breathe. From the kitchen window, she saw Maya in the driveway again, sitting cross-legged with her notebook, legs swinging and tongue poking out the side of her mouth as she drew something with great concentration. Next to her stood Jonah, wrangling a stubborn wooden ladder, trying to realign the gutters on his porch. Lila felt a strange twist to her chest. It wasn't jealousy. No, it was something softer, guilt, perhaps.
Fear.
Maya liked him. That was the part that unsettled her. Liked him in the way a child instinctively senses safety, in the way that made Lila feel both relieved and terrified. Because what if he didn't stay? Later that afternoon, there was a knock at the door. Not loud, not insistent, just enough to make her heartbeat shift. She opened it to find Jonah, holding a weathered red toolbox in one hand and a sheepish smile on his face. "You mentioned squeaky pipes the other day," he said. "Figured I could take a look if that's all right." Lila hesitated for a second too long. It wasn't the offer she doubted. It was what it meant, the door between them opening just a little more. "I'd appreciate it," she said, stepping aside. "But if you find black mold, I'm pretending I never saw it." Jonah chuckled as he walked in.
Deal.
He kneeled beneath the kitchen sink, flashlight in hand, and began fiddling with the rusted pipes while Maya sat on a nearby stool, animatedly talking about penguins, her best friend Abby, and how she hated math unless it involved ice cream. Jonah listened. Really listened. Asked questions.
Left åt här åt facts.
And every now and then, his eyes would flick toward Lila, who stood at the counter pretending to dry already dry dishes just to keep her hands busy. It had been years since anyone looked at her that way. Not like she was fragile. Not like she was just Maya's mom. But like she was seen. When the groaning from the pipes finally stopped and the water ran clear without complaint, Lila handed him a glass of water. Their fingers brushed as he took it, and though neither of them said anything, the contact lingered. "You didn't have to do this," she said softly. "I know," Jonah replied. "I wanted to." The kitchen suddenly felt too quiet, as if the air itself was holding its breath. "I'm not good at this," Lila admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "Letting people in." Jonah set the glass down. "Me neither. But I'm trying." Just then, Maya peeked in from the hallway, toothbrush in hand. "Are we keeping him?" Lila laughed, really laughed, for the first time in weeks. It burst out of her like a cork popped from a shaken bottle. "Go brush your teeth," she said, half laughing, half blushing. Maya grinned and disappeared again, humming a song under her breath. Jonah rubbed the back of his neck, smiling a little awkwardly. "She's something else." "She is," Lila said, looking toward the hallway. "She's also the best part of me." Jonah turned toward her again, slowly, deliberately. And in that silence between them, something passed through the air. Not a confession, not a promise, but a beginning. The next evening brought a chill in the air, the kind that sneaks up on you after a warm day and makes you reach for a blanket. Maya had already gone to bed, her small body curled into a tangle of limbs and stuffed animals. Lila stepped onto the porch, pulling her sweater tighter, a mug of chamomile tea warming her hands. Across the lawn, the porch light on Jonah's house glowed soft and steady. She wasn't sure if it was the tea or the silence, but for the first time in a long time, Lila felt something close to calm. A different kind of quiet, one that didn't feel lonely, one that felt shared. Jonah was sitting on his porch too, a book in his lap, though he wasn't reading. His gaze drifted across the street and met hers. He raised his mug slightly in silent greeting. Lila smiled and mirrored the gesture. They didn't say anything. They didn't have to. The silence between them no longer felt like a wall. It felt like a bridge. And in that moment, something small and unnamed nestled itself into the space between their houses, soft as fog, quiet as faith. The door was still only half open. But it was open. It started with a cough. Just a small one, dry and forgettable, echoing from Maya's room late one evening as Lila folded laundry on the couch. The window was open, letting in the crisp bite of spring air, and the scent of lilacs from the neighbor's yard drifted through like a lullaby. "She's probably catching something," Lila murmured to herself, tossing a pair of socks into the basket. Weather's shifting again. But by the time the night deepened and the stars stretched fully across the sky, Maya's cough had turned into short, wheezing gasps. Her forehead burned like a stove, and her skin was pale beneath the flush of her cheeks. Lila rushed into her daughter's room, heart already thudding in fear. Maya lay tangled in her blankets, her eyes glassy, her little chest rising and falling too quickly. Her unicorn pajama top clung to her damp skin. "Sweetheart," Lila whispered, brushing the damp hair from her daughter's face, "you're burning up." Maya blinked slowly, barely able to nod. Panic slid through Lila's veins like ice. She ran to the phone, no answer at the pediatric clinic. The nurse hotline played a robotic voice telling her she was 23rd in line. She couldn't wait. Not like this. Maya's breathing was too fast, too shallow. There was no time for callbacks and recorded apologies. She grabbed her purse, a few clothes, Maya's stuffed giraffe, and stuffed them into a tote bag with trembling hands. Then she tried lifting Maya, but she was too heavy now, and Lila's arms too weak from long shifts and too little rest. They only made it to the second step before Lila had to sit down, Maya cradled in her arms like a sleeping toddler. Her heart pounded so hard, she could barely hear her own thoughts. And then, like an answer whispered into her chaos, there was a knock at the door.
Soft.
Unassuming. But in that moment, it sounded like thunder. She opened it to find Jonas standing there, holding a box of screws and looking slightly sheepish. "I was going to fix that porch rail today," but he stopped mid-sentence. His eyes took in Lila's pale face, the child limp in her arms, and the panic in her trembling mouth. "Lila," he asked gently, his voice already changing from casual to concerned. "She's burning up," Lila choked out. "I think it's serious. I can't carry her. I tried to call the clinic, and—" "You don't need to explain," Jonah said. "Give me your keys." She hesitated. "Jonah." "You're not asking," he said, stepping into the house without waiting for an answer. "I've got her. Let's go." Without another word, he scooped Maya gently into his arms. She whimpered softly, pressing her flushed cheek into his flannel shirt. Her small hand reached for his collar and clung to it instinctively. He didn't flinch. Lila followed closely, grabbing the bag and locking the door behind her with shaking fingers. The drive to the ER felt endless. Jonah's knuckles were tight on the steering wheel, his jaw locked. Eyes flicking between the road and Maya in the rearview mirror. Lila sat in the back seat, whispering reassurances she didn't believe, holding Maya's hand as if it were her own lifeline. At the hospital, everything moved fast but also too slow. They rushed Maya into a room, hooked her to monitors, slid a thermometer across her forehead, and inserted N4 with gentle hands. Jonah stood beside Lila in the waiting area as she filled out paperwork, her hands still trembling as she wrote. "Emergency contact?" the nurse asked. Lila paused. Then, without looking up, she wrote Jonah's name. The room hummed with fluorescent lights and restless energy. Children cried in nearby rooms. Machines beeped rhythmically. But between it all, Jonah stood like a still point in a spinning world. "She's strong," he said quietly. "Kids are stronger than we think." "You don't know that she'll be okay?" Lila replied, her voice raw. "No," he admitted. "But I've been through enough nights like this to know that fear lies. It tells you there's no way out. But there is. There always is." She turned toward him, eyes rimmed red, face streaked with tears. "How did you survive it?" she asked. "Losing your son?" He took a deep breath, then let it out slowly.
Badly.
"For a long time. I didn't sleep. I didn't eat. I blamed myself. Thought maybe if I'd worked less, paid more attention, been smarter, faster, you name it, I blamed it." He sat beside her. "But grief doesn't have a manual. It just crashes in and demands you learn how to live again. piece by piece. I'm tired of pretending I know how to live, she whispered. I know, he said. But you don't have to do it alone. Just then the nurse returned. She's stable now. Still has a high fever, but the fluids are helping. We'll monitor her overnight. She asked for you, she added with a soft smile. Both of you. Lila stepped into the small, curtained room and saw Maya lying still, a stuffed giraffe clutched in one hand, her eyes barely open. Mommy, she whispered. I was scared. I know, baby, Lila said, brushing her cheek. I was too. Jonah waited outside, leaning against the cold hospital wall, staring at the floor. His thoughts weren't of tools or broken porches tonight. They were of a girl who trusted him without hesitation, and a woman whose pain looked too much like his own reflection. When Lila finally stepped back out, she looked worn but steady. She's resting, she said. Jonah nodded, relief visible in his shoulders. I don't know what I would have done if you hadn't been there, she added, voice quiet. You would have figured it out, he said. But I'm glad I could help. She looked at him, really looked, at the man who had lifted her daughter without flinching, who had driven without asking, who had stayed. And something shifted inside her. Not because he saved them, but because he hadn't tried to rescue her. He had simply shown up. And sometimes that was everything. Maya came home 2 days later, pale, tired, but recovering. The doctor said it was a high-grade viral infection, nothing life-threatening, but one that had hit her little body harder than expected. She needed rest, fluids, and warmth. She had plenty of the first two. The third, that came in quiet, unexpected ways. Jonah brought groceries the next morning without asking. He didn't knock. Just left them on the porch in 2 brown paper bags. Lila opened the door and found juice boxes, crackers, fever medicine, and a small note taped to a can of soup. Don't worry about dinner tonight. Just rest. She stood in the doorway longer than she needed to, staring down the steps toward Jonah's yard, her fingers gripping the paper bag like it might disappear. Inside, Maya was already drawing again. This time it was a new picture, a family under a tree. The tree was blooming with little pink flowers, and in the middle of the family was a man in a flannel shirt. She had written one word underneath the drawing. Almost. That week moved slowly. Lila took time off work. She spent most of it watching cartoons beside Maya, keeping her cool with damp cloths and curling up under blankets during afternoon naps. But in the stillness, something began to breathe again. A space in her chest she'd long ago sealed shut started to warm. Jonah stopped by once a day. Never stayed too long. Sometimes with soup. Sometimes with a comic book for Maya. Sometimes just to ask if the pipes were still behaving. He never pushed. And Lila began to trust that. One afternoon, Maggie, the silver-haired woman from 2 houses down, stopped by with homemade chicken soup and a story about her days as a nurse. Maya listened with wide eyes. Lila smiled politely. Jonah showed up right after, holding a wooden step stool he'd fixed for the kitchen. Maggie gave him a look that only old women can give, the kind that says, you better be a good man or I'll turn you into soup myself. Jonah just smiled and nodded.
Mom.
That night, Maya fell asleep with her head in Lila's lap, her giraffe tucked under one arm, and a comic book draped across her stomach. The living room was quiet, lit only by the golden lamp near the couch. Jonah sat on the other end, cross-legged on the floor, sorting through Maya's colored pencils with a level of seriousness that made Lila smile. She told me I had to draw something before I left, he said, holding up a stick figure with messy hair. Apparently, this is me. She gave you a 5-star beard, Lila teased. I've never been more honored. They fell into an easy silence, the kind that felt earned. Then Lila spoke. Her voice was softer than usual. I never thought I'd see my house filled with laughter again. Jonah looked up. It's a good sound. I used to think we could do this alone. Me and her. Just power through. Keep breathing. Keep moving. He waited, listening. But that wasn't living, she continued. It was surviving. I didn't realize how empty it all was until she got sick. And you showed up. Jonah leaned back against the couch. I didn't show up to be some kind of hero." "I know," she said. "That's why it mattered." Maya stirred slightly, then sighed and curled closer. Lila brushed a wisp of hair from her daughter's forehead. Jonah looked at her, the kind of look that doesn't demand anything but offers everything. "She loves you," Lila said, almost as a whisper. Jonah's throat bobbed. "I'm starting to love her too." They said nothing more that night. But when Jonah stood to leave, he paused at the door. "I was afraid, he said without turning. Afraid of feeling again. Because what if it all comes undone again?" Lila met his eyes. "Me too." He nodded. But neither of them stepped away. And somehow, that small exchange became a vow neither had the courage to speak aloud yet. The next day, Maya bounced back with surprising energy. She begged to go outside, just for a bit, wrapped in a sweater and armed with sidewalk chalk. Jonah watched from his porch as she drew a rainbow across the cracked cement, then added 3 stick figures underneath it. This time, the man in the middle had a beard and was holding hands with both the woman and the girl. He smiled. Later that afternoon, as Lila stepped onto her porch, she noticed something she hadn't seen in a long time. The porch light on Jonah's house stayed on longer than usual. So did hers. They glowed across the dark street like 2 lanterns, quietly burning toward each other. That evening, as the breeze rustled the trees and the neighborhood settled into its nightly hush, Lila made a decision. She walked next door, not for help, not for groceries, not for broken pipes. Just to sit. Jonah opened the door before she could knock. "I was just thinking about tea," he said. Lila smiled. "I brought some." They sat on his back porch under a canopy of stars, with Maya asleep next door and the kind of silence that didn't need fixing. Lila said, "when Maya was born, I used to picture this life. Not a big one. Not expensive. Just whole. Safe." Jonah looked at her gently. "You still can." "I don't know if I believe in that anymore." "I'll believe enough for both of us until you do." And for the first time in years, she let someone else's belief carry her for a while. The town's spring festival came like it always did, quiet, colorful, and tucked into the edge of May like a secret the town whispered only to those paying attention. Paper lanterns lined the street. Lemonade stands popped up next to face-painting booths and pony rides. Somewhere near the bandstand, a local trio fumbled through 80s ballads while children screamed joyfully about cotton candy and balloon swords. Maya had been talking about the fair for days. "It's today. It's today," she sang from the bathroom, spinning in a dress with sunflowers printed along the hem. "Jonah has to come, right?" Lila smiled as she brushed out her daughter's hair. "We'll see if he's free." But when Jonah arrived at their door, wearing his best pair of jeans and a button-down that clearly hadn't seen daylight in months, Lila didn't have to ask. He had already decided to come. Maya nearly tackled him. "You made it. We're gonna ride the Ferris wheel and eat too much sugar and maybe pet a goat." Jonah laughed, letting her drag him down the steps like a man being swept into a river with no intention of swimming back. Lila followed behind, holding the picnic blanket and trying not to smile too much. But it was hard. Not when Jonah took Maya's hand without thinking. Not when Maya leaned her head against his arm as they waited in line for the carousel. That afternoon, the 3 of them became something unspoken. A unit. A memory in the making. Jonah let Maya paint his face like a tiger. Lila nearly choked on her lemonade watching him pretend to growl. Maya made them go on the Ferris wheel, twice, and Jonah screamed louder than she did just to make her laugh. It wasn't perfect. It was something better. By the time the sun started dipping low behind the mountains, the 3 of them sat on a grassy hill overlooking the fairgrounds. Maya laid her head in Jonah's lap, sticky with cotton candy, her eyes blinking slowly in that exhausted, satisfied way only children mastered. Lila looked at them and swallowed the lump in her throat. Jonah caught her gaze. "What?" he asked softly. She's never had a day like this." Jonah looked down at Maya, gently brushing a wisp of hair from her forehead. "Neither have I," he admitted. They sat in that golden silence for a long while. The music from the fair was muffled now, floating on the breeze like a lullaby. Lila watched a pair of fireflies blink near her elbow and smiled. Then Maya stirred. "Jonah," she said quietly, her voice laced with a mixture of hesitation and hope. "Yeah, kiddo?" She sat up, brushing off her dress. Her hands fidgeted in her lap. "I know you're not, like, my real dad, like the one from the pictures." Jonah went still. Lila inhaled. Maya continued anyway. "But would it be okay if sometimes I called you Dad? Like only if you want. And not all the time. Just sometimes." Jonah stared at her. This small, bright light of a girl who had walked into his life like a sunrise he didn't know he was waiting for. He didn't speak for a moment. Then, gently, he crouched in front of her, taking both her hands into his calloused ones. "You know what, Maya?" he said, voice rough with emotion. "You don't have to call me anything you don't want to. But if Dad feels right to you, then it feels right to me, too." Maya smiled, so wide it could have broken the sky open. And behind her, Lila wiped away tears she hadn't realized were falling. That night, as they returned home and Maya drifted into sleep beneath a pile of stuffed animals and one extremely glittery fair prize, Lila lingered in the hallway. Jonah stood beside her, quietly watching. "She's brave," he said. "She is." They stood in silence, their shoulders almost touching. "She meant it," Lila said after a moment. "When she asked you that." "I know," Jonah whispered. "And I meant it too," Lila added. Jonah turned slightly, his voice low. "Meant what?" "That I want you here. That I trust you. Not just for her but for me." Jonah looked at her then, not like a man watching something fragile, but like someone seeing something whole. "I'm not going anywhere," he said. The porch light from his house blinked across the street like a second heartbeat. Lila stepped just a little closer. "I used to think trusting someone again would feel like jumping off a cliff," she whispered. "And now it feels like walking towards something I've already been missing." Jonah didn't answer with words. Just a quiet, steady presence. And somehow it was everything she needed. It was nearly summer now. The trees had thickened into full bloom, the air was warm well past sunset, and the laughter inside Lila's house had become something consistent. No longer rare or surprising, just quietly welcome. The once silent spaces, the kitchen, the porch, even the hallway outside Maya's room, had become filled with the kind of joy that didn't have to be loud to be real. Jonah had started showing up regularly. Not as a guest. Not as a stranger. But as someone who had a toothbrush in the bathroom drawer and knew which cereal Maya liked on Thursdays versus Fridays. And still, Lila hadn't said the words. Not the big ones. Not the ones she'd locked away after Maya's father left. But something in her was changing. Softening. One evening, after Maya had fallen asleep surrounded by glittery markers and an unfinished drawing of a treehouse, Lila pulled out the box. The one she hadn't touched in years. It was at the back of her closet, beneath an old winter coat and a dusty pair of heels she hadn't worn since her baby shower. The shoebox still had a hospital bracelet tucked inside, a faded sonogram picture, and a yellowed onesie that once smelled like powder and hope. And on top, folded carefully, was a card from her mother, the last one she'd received before cancer took her. It said, "You're stronger than you think. But you don't have to be strong alone." Lila sat on the floor for a long time, reading that line over and over until the words no longer blurred behind tears. The walls she'd built had protected her, but they'd also kept everything out, even the good things. She had told herself that Maya didn't need anyone else. But what if she had been wrong? The next morning, the sunlight poured in through the kitchen window as Maya hummed to herself at the table, scribbling in her sketchpad. She was drawing them again, her and Jonah, this time sitting on the porch swing, with Lila beside them holding a tray of lemonade. No one looked like they were leaving.
Lila paquet da picnic basket.
Just sandwiches, fruit, and Maya's favorite chocolate chip cookies, the ones they rarely had time to bake during school weeks. When she knocked on Jonah's door that afternoon, he opened it in his usual flannel shirt, looking both surprised and quietly thrilled. "You're here," he said, smiling. "No broken pipes," she replied. "No sick kids. Just a blanket and some sandwiches." He looked past her at the basket. That's a serious blanket. It's a serious afternoon, she said with a shrug. We were hoping you'd join us in the backyard. He nodded, and together they laid the blanket beneath the large maple tree that stood like a quiet guardian over the edge of the yard. Maya immediately flopped onto the grass and declared she was the queen of Sandwich Land. Jonah bowed. Your Majesty. Lila laughed, the sound light and full, like something that had been stored away and was finally being aired out. They spent the afternoon talking about silly things. Maya told him her latest invention idea, a flying backpack that shot bubbles, and Jonah swore he'd try to build it. Lila listened more than she spoke, just taking them in, her daughter and this man who had walked into their lives so quietly but stayed like he'd always belonged. After lunch, as Maya napped with her head on Jonah's arm, Lila leaned against the tree trunk beside them and finally found the words. I don't know where this is going, she said softly. Jonah looked at her, eyes calm and steady. But I'd like to keep walking toward it, she finished. With you. Jonah didn't hesitate. Then let's walk. Later that night, as fireflies began to glow like tiny stars just above the lawn, Lila sat with Jonah on the porch. Maya was already tucked into bed, her coloring book spread open on her chest like a soft shield against the world. Jonah held a mug of tea in one hand, his fingers resting comfortably against Lila's knee. There was nothing rushed in his touch. No weight, no expectation, just presence. I thought love would feel scarier, Lila admitted. Jonah nodded. Sometimes it is. Sometimes it still is. They sat in silence, watching the quiet blink of Maya's night light through her window. Do you ever feel guilty, she asked quietly, for being happy again? Like you're betraying the pain? Jonah took a deep breath before answering. Every day. But then I remind myself, healing doesn't mean forgetting. It just means choosing to live. Again. And again. Lila rested her head against his shoulder. Thank you, she whispered. For what? For showing up. For not turning away. He smiled. Thank her, he said. She's the one who opened the door. Lila looked toward Maya's room, then back at Jonah. She prayed, she said softly, for someone who would stay. And then you knocked. Jonah leaned down and pressed the gentlest kiss to her forehead. I didn't know I was answering a prayer, he said. And Lila smiled, because neither did she. But that didn't make it any less true. The summer deepened. It didn't arrive with fireworks or thunderclaps, just longer days, warmer nights, and the slow, rhythmic heartbeat of something beautiful growing in the quiet between three people who never asked for each other, but somehow were exactly what each one needed. Lila's house felt different now. Not because the furniture had moved or the walls had changed color, but because the energy had shifted. There were more magnets on the fridge, chore charts with all three of their names scribbled in crayon. There was laughter from the living room that didn't feel forced. Jonah had taught Maya how to ride her bike without training wheels on a Thursday evening while Lila filmed it with shaking hands and a trembling smile. He didn't celebrate with high fives or fanfare. He just held out his arms when Maya turned the corner and crashed into his legs, giggling. You did it, kiddo, he whispered, steadying her. I did it 'cause you were there, she beamed. Jonah looked up and caught Lila's gaze through the window. She was already crying and smiling. On weekends, they built a bookshelf together for Maya's room. Jonah brought tools, Lila brought snacks, and Maya brought commentary. This shelf is for books. This one's for drawings. This one's for secrets. And this one's for my rock collection. Jonah raised an eyebrow. Secrets. I won't tell if you don't, Maya grinned. They painted the bookshelf ocean blue, Jonah's favorite color. Maya insisted on adding stars along the sides. Lila touched the paint as it dried and felt something stir in her chest again. Roots. That's what it was. For the first time in years, she wasn't bracing for someone to leave. She wasn't building backup plans or waiting for silence. She was living. And so was Jonah. But then came the anniversary. Jonah had mentioned it only once. My son passed on a Thursday, he'd told Lila. 3 years ago. And now, that Thursday had come around again. Lila woke up that morning, and knew the ache would be waiting in his eyes. She didn't see him in the morning, didn't hear him hammering outside, didn't see the porch light blink on, but she understood. Sometimes grief needed space, and sometimes love meant not filling silence, but waiting beside it. By mid-afternoon, she packed a small bouquet of wildflowers and helped Maya into her sundress. "We're going for a shore drive," she said gently. "To where?" "To be there. For someone we love." They found him where Lila suspected he'd be. At the cemetery, kneeling at a small stone. The sun filtered softly through the trees, dappling Jonah's back in gold. He wasn't crying. He wasn't talking.
Just being.
Maya didn't run to him. She walked slowly, carrying the wildflowers like a sacred offering. She sat beside him on the grass and placed the bouquet gently on the grave. "This is for your little boy," she said. "I hope he likes colors." Jonah looked at her, eyes glassy. "He would have liked you," he whispered. Lila knelt on his other side, her hand finding his. They didn't speak for a while. They didn't need to. Later that evening, back at the house, Lila reached into a drawer and pulled out a small wrapped box. "I've been meaning to give you this," she said. Jonah opened it slowly. Inside was a framed photo. Maya in the middle, her arms around Jonah and Lila, all of them smiling beneath the maple tree. In the corner, in Maya's messy handwriting, were the words, "Sometimes prayers look like people." Jonah stared at it for a long time. "I don't know how to be anyone's replacement," he said quietly. "And I'd never try to be." "You're not," Lila said, touching his hand. "You're just exactly who we needed. Not instead of. Just because of." That night, Jonah stayed for dinner. After the dishes were done and Maya was brushing her teeth, Lila poured 2 glasses of lemonade and sat with Jonah on the porch. The cicadas had started to sing. The moon hung low and golden, like it was eavesdropping. "I'm scared sometimes," Lila admitted. Jonah looked over. "Of what?" "That this isn't real. That it's too good. That one day I'll wake up and it'll all be gone." Jonah reached for her hand. "Real isn't perfect," he said. "It's just steady. And I'm still here." She looked at him. Really looked. Not as the man who knocked on her door, but the man who stayed. Who didn't promise the moon. Just presence. And that was more than enough. Late summer arrived slowly, with sunsets that painted the sky in sleepy oranges and dusky purples. The days were still long, but the nights had begun to cool, just enough to remind everyone that time, like seasons, keeps moving. Jonah was no longer just the man next door. He was part of the rhythm now. There was his coffee mug beside Lila's in the kitchen sink, his muddy boots by the back door. Maya's crayon drawings now featured him in almost every scene, riding unicorns, helping with homework, and once, wearing a pink tutu that made Lila laugh so hard she had to sit down. Evenings were spent on the porch, where they all shared stories and silence, wrapped in mosquito blankets and dreams that no longer felt distant. Jonah had become someone who didn't just fit into their lives, he helped them expand. On weekends, he and Lila would cook together. She taught him how to make the perfect chicken curry without setting off the fire alarm, which he had managed to do twice before. In return, Jonah taught Maya how to whittle small sticks into animal shapes in the backyard while Lila watched from the kitchen window, her heart full. But one night changed everything. Not because of anything dramatic, but because of a whisper. Maya, freshly bathed and glowing with the simple joy of childhood, knelt beside her bed like she always did. The stuffed giraffe lay beside her, and the window cracked open, let in the soft sounds of wind moving through trees. "Hi God," she whispered. "It's me again, Maya." She paused, fingers folded tight. "Remember when I asked you to send someone for Mommy? Someone who could make her smile again? I just wanted to say, thank you. You sent him. I think you sent him for all of us." She glanced toward the hallway, where the light from the living room flickered softly. "And if it's okay, I think I want to call him Dad all the time now, because that's what it feels like." She tucked herself into bed, wrapping the giraffe close. Outside, Lila and Jonah sat on the porch steps. Maya's words, though whispered behind closed doors, seemed to float out the window and settle softly into the evening air. "Do you think she'll remember this someday?"
Jonah asked.
Lila turned her head toward him. Every second of it. He smiled, that soft kind of smile that had taken months to grow on him. "I never thought I'd have this again," he said. "A family. A home." Lila leaned her shoulder against his. "I never thought I'd trust anyone again." He laced his fingers through hers.
"But here we are," he said.
And that was all the truth they needed. Later that week, Lila pulled out a photo album, one she hadn't opened in years. It was filled with Maya's baby pictures, footprints on hospital paper, a hospital ID bracelet still tied in a small knot, and a photo of Lila holding her newborn, exhaustion and joy carved into her face. She flipped to the last page, one that had been left blank for years. And she placed a new picture there. Maya on Jonah's shoulders, her arms stretched like wings. Lila laughing beside them. Sunshine everywhere. And underneath in the margin she wrote, "Family found again." Weeks passed. And months. The days didn't become perfect. There were still bills, tantrums, and sleepless nights.
But there was also joy.
Wholeness. And presence. Jonah taught Maya how to hammer nails into a treehouse they built together in the backyard. Lila watched them from the kitchen, her hands wrapped around a cup of tea, and she realized something. She no longer waited for the other shoe to drop. She no longer braced for heartbreak. She was living again.
Whole.
Safe.
Loved.
One night, while Maya slept curled under a blanket of stars painted on her ceiling, she mumbled through a dream. "Mommy," she whispered. Lila was just passing by the door and stepped inside. "Yes, baby? Do you think he'll stay forever?" Lila sat on the edge of her bed and brushed a strand of hair from her daughter's face. She looked toward the hallway, where Jonah's soft laughter echoed as he tried, again, to fix the squeaky hinge on the bathroom door. She smiled gently. "He already has," she said. And outside, under the glow of two porch lights, one his, one hers, fireflies danced like stars that had finally come home.